Wow, what a beautiful day. Welcome, you have entered the zone of high strangeness, a place where the unbelievable is believed until proven otherwise. This is Gary Wheeler, your host, and very glad to be here today, this beautiful spring day. I think it might be our first real spring day, and you can peel off those clothes and enjoy being out in the garden, getting your hands in the earth, and taking a walk or whatever pleases you on such a wonderful day here in Rockland, Maine. Today we will be accepting phone calls. The number here is 207-593-0013. Anybody's welcome to call, especially like to hear from people who have either had some sort of experience with an unidentified flying object, or know somebody who has, or just has a strong opinion about the subject one way or another. We're open to all kinds of viewpoints here and would be glad to discuss anything that a caller would like to talk about. A little FYI as usual, again to announce that the conference in California is taking place in May from 25th to the 31st, and it's a conference on UFOs and ET visitation to the Earth, and it's being held at Joshua Tree Park in California. A gorgeous place in the desert, and all the heavyweights are going to be there, all the ufologists and scientists who are involved in this topic, and there'll be a lot of discussion, a lot of lectures, and a whole lot of information. It'd be a good place to go if you have interest in this subject. Again, to remind you, you're out there taking pictures on a beautiful day. Your digital camera has the capability of picking up some infrared and ultraviolet frequencies that you can't see with your eyes. So it may pick up things in the sky that you haven't seen when you were taking the picture. So look at your pictures closely when you view them on your computer. You may see something that you didn't see when you took the picture. And that something just could be a UFO. Also a reminder for you folk who are interested in crop circles, even though it's not the season right now, there's a website that's entitled ccdb.ws. It has a composite of all kinds of crop circles that have appeared over the last few years. And this last year, I think there were over 31 new ones in 2014. Also, you can go to my Facebook page that I have. It's called GW News 2, and on that page is all kinds of information on crop circles, as well as information about UFOs and ET visitation. It's a page full of information. I'll take a minute to thank my sponsors and Diverse Landscapes here in Rockland, and Eric Best, who's an author and business consultant. Also, take a moment to thank all you people who have made contributions to WRFR. The fundraising is still going on because the move is still taking place fairly soon, I think, and money is still needed for that move. And as you know, probably, the station is fully run by volunteers. So the money is needed to get new equipment and supply what is needed to build the new studio at Lincoln Street Center. So again, if you can loosen up your wallet or your loose change, you can go to the website, wrfr.org, and there you'll find a way to contribute. And again, we appreciate all donations. This afternoon, I'm going to finish up with the interview with Stanton Friedman, the ufologist and nuclear physicist. That interview we played over the last couple of weeks as with the dark journalists on YouTube, and you can see it there as well. And it's about his experience in the whole UFO field and revelations about the cover-up, and his feelings about how he believes that the ETs are basically put the human race under quarantine, not allowing us to pursue any more space odysseys, manned space odysseys, until we learn how to clean up our act and get rid of our tendency to want to confront and destroy things that seem strange to us. So he's a very interesting man, and this end of this interview lasts about 20 minutes, and we'll play that, and then after that there'll be a short talk by me, and then we'll have a short debate between Friedman and another gentleman who was a debunker back in the 80s. And it's quite amusing and entertaining. So I'll be quiet now and put on the end of the interview with Stanton Friedman. Here we go.
And I know you've studied the space program for a long time. I wonder why, after all these successful lunar missions and all the hoopla around landing on the moon, that NASA turns around and completely abandons the moon missions. They stop talking about manned missions to Mars and space exploration. I mean, what do you think is the reason for this mysterious lack of action on their part?
Boy, I wish I knew. Everybody I knew in the space program back in the 60s figured we'd have a base on the moon by the end of this century. We certainly would have gone to Mars. I don't know how many times, but at least once.
Uh-huh.
And it was as if, I joke, Nixon said it was because of the money. The money was that we built Apollo 18 and 19. They were built.
They had already spent the money on it.
Yeah, and the Navy is going to be out there, whether you're looking for an astronaut coming back in a command module or not. I mean, there's not a lot of extra money associated with that.
Yeah.
One obvious answer is the aliens said, get the heck off our moon. No.
Well, listen, I think that's a really logical assumption, and probably in the final analysis makes the most sense. And again, all that's necessary to believe that would be the understanding that an advanced civilization could travel into our solar system and build some bases on the moon, which would be an excellent vantage point to observe the Earth.
What we're missing, I think, because I get people saying, well, Stan, come on, you're telling me aliens send a craft from another star system and it crashes when it gets here? I said, no, I'm not telling you that at all. What do you mean? Well, think of the nuclear-powered carrier. I'm talking about an Earth excursion module. Between the stars is one technology realm, one problem. How do you get from that star system to this one? And the second is once you reach the atmosphere of a planet, how do you go around where you have to worry about heating and drag and lift and all these kinds of things and gravitational field and all that sort of stuff.
So what you're talking about is basically like a shuttlecraft that's coming from a main ship.
Yeah. And we have many reports of huge motherships, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
Twice the size of an aircraft carrier is the way one pilot described what he was watching. We have data on those. We have, the government has radar information about such systems. And so we have a direct analogy here. Two-part system. I mean, the 747 doesn't land in my backyard when I want to travel somewhere.
Right.
It doesn't even land at the local airport. I got to take a taxi to the airport, a small plane from that airport to a bigger airport, Toronto for me, usually, and then a big airplane from Toronto. So that's how we do things.
Right.
So we are not spending a lot of effort looking at things sensibly. And why not? I'm not sure. Maybe not only the aliens, but there are people without imagination.
Uh-huh.
Many programs, people understand the fundamental principle of advanced technology development. Progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way.
Okay.
The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You have to change how you do things. A laser isn't just a better light bulb.
Yes.
Entirely different physics. It really is.
Yeah. Well, you did that excellent book, Science Was Wrong, with Kathleen Martin.
Yes.
Which was about the lack of vision of the scientific community and how some of the really big players have been totally off base about crucial things.
Like the astronomer who said in 1903, October, Simon Newcomb, top American astronomer, so important that when he died a few years later, the president attended his funeral.
Wow.
He said if there's one thing he was certain of, man would never fly in a vehicle. 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. In 1956, a year before Sputnik, the British astronomer Royal said, space travel is utter bilge. Why would anybody spend the money? What we need is better instrumentation for astronomy. And what field has benefited the most from the space program? Astronomy.
Absolutely.
Because you can start looking from above the atmosphere, which makes all the difference in the world, But this happens in medicine. It happens in many different areas. where the word of the big shot carries sway, even though he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about.
Oh, yeah.
We have to look forward, not backward. And sure, the first systems, you got to be ready to spot something strange. X-rays was one thing. Penicillin was another thing.
So in our modern era, seeing these unidentified craft performing these incredible maneuvers in our skies should be the odd thing that makes us stop and say, something powerful and unusual is happening here.
And that's where MJ-12 comes into the picture. Because they would have had to look at a couple of different things. Think of an old Western wagon wheel without the rim. The information all goes into the center, but it doesn't go around the spokes center. And they would have to look at not only measurements made by classified equipment, radar, the film taken by pilots of military aircraft chasing UFOs. You don't see that out in the open.
Right.
Measurements made with instruments on board aircraft. You know, electric and magnetic fields, how the color changes around the saucer, etc. And then, of course, the best sighting reports. And when we recover another one, recovery team, as you mentioned, and bodies, we got to look at the makeup of the bodies, too.
Oh, yeah.
And what's different about these guys, if anything? And so you need something like Majestic 12, to sit in the middle there, bring stuff in. And it's multi-service, if you will, just like the Manhattan Project. They didn't just go to one place and say, you guys take care of everything. You have a coordinating body, the Atomic Energy Commission. But you have people in many different places doing parts of the puzzle. The people who make the bombs, who store them, who figure out how to deliver them, how to make measurements with detectors and all the rest of that. So it's a complex thing. This was done in secret. A total of more than 40,000 people were involved in the Manhattan Project when we looked at all the different places. You had Nobel Prize winners working at Los Alamos in secret, getting their mail at a post office box in Santa Fe. I mean, what I'm saying is, these are big programs. When you decide there's a reason for doing something, the United States can bring to bear an enormous amount of effort.
They're going to make it happen.
Yeah, if somebody decides this is what we're going to do.
Well, that's an excellent point. And certainly once we learned that this UFO presence was using super sophisticated technology, acquiring information on that technology and trying to replicate it obviously became a top priority for us at the time.
Yeah.
So let's go a little further using the failure to go back to the moon as our jumping off point. You know, what about the possibility that these off-world visitors did in fact communicate with our leaders and basically put them on notice or express some concern? Then there's a lot of witness testimony actually that points to this scenario. What do you think of this?
Now, like I say, I have no idea whether they've been told. There's a book by a guy named Art Campbell about Ike's meeting with aliens twice.
Yes.
In New Mexico, as a matter of fact.
Yes, exactly. And the basic idea there is that these aliens approached Eisenhower and communicated intense concern about our nuclear program at the time.
Well, what I'm saying is that somebody might have taken that to heart. There have been instances in the Soviet Union as well as in the United States of shutting down nuclear tipped missiles. Bob Salas, S-A-L-A-S, has written an excellent book, and he was down in the hole managing the facility, and the saucers were at the gate up above. It gets radioed down, and then 10 missiles went down, ICBMs, one after the other. Now, there's no way that can happen, but it did.
I see, yeah.
And they did a big investigation. They still don't know why, but it's happened other places, too.
Yeah, well, what do you think is the message there? Are they testing our facilities, or is it a threat?
I think the message is, we're aware of you idiots, and we don't want to see this happen. Because remember, when you throw into the picture that they know that we know about nuclear fusion, all those H-bombs and stuff, that we could take our brand of friendship out there. Who would want it?
Yeah.
I think they want to quarantine us. And not, look, obviously, if they wanted, they could denude the whole planet.
Sure.
But that's apparently not what they want to do. So, when people ask me, why are aliens coming here? Guest, food, lodging, next exit. It's a weekly radio show, Idiocy in the Boondocks.
Yeah.
They're mining. People don't know that the Earth is the densest planet in the solar system.
Okay.
Cubic foot of Earth, some people think all planets are the same. They're not. Cubic foot of Earth weighs more than a cubic foot of any other planet in our solar system. You say, so who cares? Well, that means there are more heavy metals here. And these are rare oddballs. Iridium, osmium, rhenium, platinum, tungsten. Gold is a very dense metal. Osmium is twice as dense as lead. Very heavy. And it's rare. We know from the spectrum of the stars.
Yeah.
So maybe they're coming here to steal goodies. And we don't realize, you know what uranium was used for 100 years ago? It was a yellow coloring agent for dinnerware.
Oh, that's great.
That's illegal now, you understand.
Yeah.
It's radioactive. But,
Nuclear dinner plates. That's good.
yeah, and the Navy uses zirconium. Whoever used zirconium for anything? But it's got very good nuclear and corrosion resistance properties. So the Navy, they had to work out a whole industry to make tubing and pipes and so forth out of zirconium.
Mm-hmm.
Now, titanium, the SR-71 uses titanium. High strength at high temperatures and so forth. So these are things that we didn't give a darn about 100 years ago. So who knows what the aliens are here for? Rare earths. China's cornered the market, but all the electric cars use rare earths. And so they're worth something if you got in your backyard.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, why did all those 49ers go out looking for gold? They're up to Alaska. Thousands of people went looking for a heavy metal. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll take a moment to interrupt here and remind you you're listening to High Strangeness at WRFR. And that's Stanton Friedman you're listening to. And it's an interview with what is known as the Dark Journalist that appeared on YouTube. And this is the final conclusion of a very long interview that we played over the last couple of weeks. And I'd also like to remind you again that calls are being accepted. The number here is 207-593-0013. Okay, we'll get back to Stanton Friedman.
Well, if you look at it from the point of view that they've started visiting here very heavily after our atomic program kicked in, it does seem to be connected somehow.
Well, I would think so. I would think every civilization is concerned about its survival and security.
Mm-hmm.
That means you got to keep tabs on the primitives in the neighborhood, but only close tabs on those primitives to show signs of being able to bother you.
Yeah.
World War II was the turning point. All of a sudden, we were going to be in a position to bother them.
Yeah.
And all it takes is the will and the money and so forth. And you can't wait for the other guy to attack you before you say, oh, I better watch out for these bad guys.
Right, exactly.
If you can, you just as soon stay where you are, you idiots. And so I'm very concerned about our world doesn't seem to be concerned about a planetary viewpoint. We're all here on the same planet. We're all in it together. A nuclear holocaust is going to make a mess in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Not where I live, because nobody would want to bother us. But what I'm getting at is we need a whole new outlook. I was very pleased when the Pope a few years back said, no reason that our brethren in outer space can't be made by God just as we are. My first thought was, who's he been talking to?
Yeah, right. Well, Stan is one of the best researchers in the UFO field out there. Really the guy who went into the deepest side of the cover-up and brought us back so much knowledge about how this works. How do you feel our modern attitude to the UFO phenomena has progressed? If you could compare us now, going into 2015, versus where we were in, say, the 1990s, Have we lost some ground in terms of our research and understanding of the field in this current period, say, over the last decade?
Frankly, I think we have. Not enough young people coming into the field. There are some exceptions. John Greenwald of the Black Vault
Oh, yeah.
website is a young man, and boy, he's collected an awful lot of information.
Definitely.
But I think we need to get the ancient academics and fossilized physicists off their butts.
Yeah.
Their attitude of arrogance is truly incredible. And I don't say this because I've had a problem. I haven't. I've had a good press around the world. And 11 hecklers and 700 lectures, 2 of them were drunk, is not a bad record. You have that many if you talk about sports, religion, politics. So I'm trying to encourage other people to speak up. And MUFON is gearing up, so to speak, to be doing more stuff. Mutual UFO Network. And I'm glad. I hope to be at this coming year's. I was supposed to be at last year's, but the heart attack got in the way. But
Sure.
So, but I think you're right. And there was just a conference in France this summer about how to compile a big database, which we need to unify. There are a bunch of different databases, but you can't interact with each other. Somebody over here can't get into that one. And
Right.
So I'm optimistic, and the Europeans are ahead of us. They have done more. The French have an official government group investigating UFOs. The United States, and it comes as a shocker, there was a Air Force General, Carol Bolander, who in 1969 was asked, what should we do about Project Blue Book? This is after the University of Colorado study recommended it be closed. And he had no connection with them. He was working on the lunar excursion module, engineer, Air Force General.
Okay.
And we found, 10 years later, we found a memo that he'd written that recommended Blue Book indeed be closed because it wasn't serving any useful function. In this memo, he said, moreover, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are not responded, they're not investigated by Project Blue Book. Instead, there are 2 different memos that are used to provide rules. These are only reports which could affect national security.
Uh-huh.
And then 2 paragraphs later, he says, if we close Project Blue Book, we won't have a place for the public to report sightings. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for that purpose. Now, you realize the Air Force has lied every minute. The program was closed as a result of that.
Yeah.
In 1969. They've lied all that time. We don't have any interest in UFOs. There's no national security implication. Now, I talked to Bolander. I think I'm the only one who has out in the UFO community. 10 years later, when I finally got a copy of this, it's easier to find people who have somewhat unusual names. John Smith's are top.
Right.
And I said, it sounds to me like you're saying that there are 2 separate communication channels for UFO sightings. Those which could affect national security. And the example I used was such as a UFO going down the runway at a strategic air command base where nuclear weapons are stored. By definition, I've heard of cases like that.
Yeah.
By definition, that's a national security issue. There's not supposed to be anybody there.
Sure.
And those, if say my wife and I go out the end of our driveway and see a saucer fly over, big deal. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
He agreed with me. Yes, 2 separate channels. No major news group has had guts enough to publish that.
It's amazing.
We've got a cosmic Watergate, and it's being treated like Alice's Tea Party.
Yeah.
We need more effort. Matter of fact, the theme of MUFON this past year was press coverage. In my paper a few months ago, which I didn't get to present, but is included in the proceedings, dealt with press coverage and how bad it has been and what we need, where do we need to go from here? And also pointing out that much of the badness comes from the misrepresentation on the part of the ancient academics and fossilized physicists.
Absolutely.
The people say the government can't keep secrets.
Right.
It's an absurd remark.
Definitely.
No appreciation for the fact that most advanced research and development doesn't get done in academia.
Right.
It's done in industry and in the national laboratories.
Oh, they're great at keeping secrets.
Yeah, but people don't want to admit that. You mean they didn't tell me?
Yes, exactly. And that brings us into something that you're known for pointing out, which is intelligence infiltration of the media.
Yeah.
Now, they may have set the tone early on through covert intel channels into the very top of the reporting outlets, just saying, don't cover this UFO topic in a serious manner.
Well, yes. Good observation. As a matter of fact, within 2 weeks of the start of World War II, there was an appointment of a czar to get rid of stuff that you don't, instructions what not to talk about.
Right.
People don't. I don't think the office is closed myself. Frank,
Yeah.
the thing here is that we need to collect the data that's already out there, and we need to recognize that there are implications here for man's future. We're a planet, not just a bunch of nationalistic groups. No government wants to admit that, though. Everybody wants their people to owe their allegiance to that government, right?
Definitely.
Not to the planet. It's time for some changes to be made.
Yeah.
Especially when, tough as it sounds, we're not as important as we'd like to think we are.
Yeah, right.
You know, that's the big kicker. Aren't we the big cheeses kind of thing? Well, no, as a matter of fact. And I hope that my great-grandson grows up in a world that's different, in other words. But look at how big $1 trillion on this planet is spent this year on things military. $1 trillion. Look how many kids die of starvation every day. That tells you a lot about this planet, doesn't it? No matter how you slice it.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned about the future, and I think that everybody should be. And I think we need to stand back and see how we look to others. I wish the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us, as Bobby Burns said. You know,
Right.
I think we need that.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. After this amazing career that you've had, just pulling the UFO cover-up into the light, what do you think is the best course of action for the researchers out there who are following in your footsteps?
There's a lot of data out there. And I think we need to get, Max Planck, great German physicist, once said that new ideas come to be accepted, not because their opponents come to believe in them, but because their opponents die and a new generation grows up that's accustomed to them.
Oh, that's an excellent quote.
And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Ideas that sound incredible today won't sound incredible 10 years from now.
Well, your books are the best on the topic. I really recommend your book, Top Secret Magic, which is all about MJ-12 and the UFO cover-up. And you have many more excellent books that are available at your website.
Thank you.
Can you give us the web address to go to?
Let me give my website, www.stantonfriedman.com. And it lists my books and includes Special Report 14, no place else to get it.
Right.
So people, and it gives my email address and all the rest of that.
Now, Stan, maybe you can clear up one last thing for me. I hear in some circles that you're called the Godfather. Is that true?
Some people have referred to me in such a way that I can say I'm the godfather of ufology.
I agree with that 100%, by the way. Well, I really appreciate you being here on the show today. Of course, your work has been a great inspiration and influence for me. I think anyone who's interested in learning about the extraterrestrial presence, their advanced technology, and the UFO cover-up will really find the crucial information within your research and writing. So thank you so much for your important work.
Well, I appreciate those comments. I am getting older, but we'll plow on at least for another year.
Well, you're so sharp in this interview. I have to say you're at your best.
Well, I can tell the difference, but we'll work at it.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, have a great evening over there.
You.
And we look forward to everything you're going to be up to in 2015.
Me too. Thank you.
Thanks, Stan.
Thank you for joining me for this fascinating episode on UFOs, MJ-12, and covert cover-ups with Stanton Friedman. You can find more special reports, interviews, and documentaries at www.darkjournalists.com. See you soon.
Okay, that's the end of that tape of Stanton Friedman being interviewed by the Dark Journalist. And Stanton Friedman certainly is the grandfather of ufology. His work over the last 40, 50 years has brought the field so much further into the public awareness of this amazing phenomena. And he has a lot to be proud of. And if you go to his website or just Google him, you'll see the many books he has written, many lectures he's given, and also some movies that he's actually been part of around the whole ufology field. And he's really worth listening to, as you can tell. And the next tape we'll follow up with is a short interview of him with another gentleman named PHILLIP KLASS, who was a renowned debunker of the whole UFO field back in the 80s. And he and Friedman had a small debate on a show that was hosted by Ted Koppel. But before I do that, I would just like to say that, you know, this little radio station sends out waves out into this atmosphere and probably beyond, out into what we would call space. And I would like to make an invitation to any ETs that are happening to pick up these waves occasionally and listening to this show, and invite them to either come here and knock on the door or give me a telephone call so we could have an interview. And I think that would be a marvelous way to introduce the whole experience of other races visiting this planet to the public, especially the public right here in Rockland. And it would put us on the map in probably a very different way than we're on the map already. I'll remind you again, you are listening to High Strangeness. I'm Gary Wheeler, and this is WRFR, 93.3 FM in Rockland and 99.3 in Camden. Also streaming on the website wrfr.org, where there's also archives of past programs. So now we'll turn to that debate I was talking about. This actually took place in 1987, so it's a little bit older, but it was right in the middle of Friedman's reign as far as being the prime ufologist, defending his opinion about UFOs. Here we go.
Joining us in our Washington bureau is Phil Klass, an editor with Aviation Week magazine, a scientific investigation of claims of the paranormal, a group which checks out claims of UFO sightings. Also here in Washington is Stanton Friedman, a physicist who's been involved in nuclear space and research for such companies as General Electric, Westinghouse, and General Motors. He has studied and lectured on UFOs for almost 30 years and is in Washington this week taking part in the International Symposium of the Mutual UFO Network. Mr. Friedman, there are books, there are magazine articles, there are television interview programs which have very little time, such as this one. Give it your best shot. If you are seeking to convince the skeptical, what do you point to?
I'm seeking to convince the healthy agnostics. The skeptics don't want to listen to the data and my findings. I point to the 2,400 plus landing trenches in the environment collected from 65. The 3,200 cases in Project Blue Book Special Report 14, 20% of which couldn't be explained, and had all the characteristics we attribute to flying saucers. I point to the 3,500 pilot sightings collected by a NASA scientist on the West Coast. I point to Bud Hopkins' 140 abductees with a waiting list of 200, and an enormous amount of data in the form of documents, some of them obtained from the government directly, some not so directly, clearly indicating that our planet is being visited, that some UFOs are alien spacecraft, and that we are indeed dealing with a cosmic Watergate. For example, I also point to the 92 different witnesses that William Moore and I have talked to about the Roswell incident that was described briefly in the early piece on the program.
I'll tell you what, let me make it a little tougher for you. Instead of all these pieces of evidence to which you're referring, refer to one concrete, substantive, visible piece of evidence that exists somewhere, something that we can look at, touch, feel.
I think you've asked the wrong question. By the nature of the beast, the pieces that were picked up at Roswell, for example, which are described in the document that was alluded to earlier, are not available for your viewing or my viewing. They clearly are top secret, eyes only, something above that.
Understand, but for example, the abductees, and you say there are how many of them now? 100 and...
There are but over 120 of those.
Now, none of them has come back with anything except memories.
That seems to be the case. They also come back with descriptions of writing. 5 of those looked at independently. None of those had any way of knowing what the other people had drawn from what they claimed to have seen. So we have duplication that seems to pass any notion of randomness that would be attributable to phony stories, if you will.
Mr. Klass, what about the, all right, 5 people who come back make approximate sketches of something that they claim to have seen? Presumably they have not had contact with one another? I don't know.
Ted, they're as identical as you and I are. I would wish that we were as identical. Let me respond, if I may, to an issue that's come up here that I think is a very important one. These alleged top-secret, eyes-only documents provide ABC, provide the nation, an opportunity to find out for themselves firsthand what sort of nonsense the UFO proponents are spouting. I would suggest the following. If ABC thinks there's even 1%, even a 1% chance that those documents are authentic, launch an all-out effort. Go to the president of ABC, ask for 50 of your best investigative journalists, and within a month come back and report either these documents are authentic, we have captured a flying saucer, the government has maintained a cover-up for 40 years, or come back and report it's nonsense and there has never been so great a con job done against the news media and the public as has been perpetrated with the release of these phony documents.
Mr. Klass, on the one hand, you know, you've been a journalist for a long time yourself, that it's not quite as easy as that, but on the other hand, I would take part of what you have said and pose this question to Mr. Friedman. I don't know how familiar you are with Washington. I'm very familiar with Washington, and I know that it is almost impossible to keep a story of that sort of dimension without some leak or another filtering out from some part of the bureaucracy or the government establishment over a period of 40 days, let alone 40 years.
Ted, let me comment about that. One thing I am familiar with is I worked on classified programs for 15 years. I had a high-level security clearance. And essentially everybody I've talked to who also has had high-level security clearances agrees fully with the notion that secrets are being kept, that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of so-called black programs. Impressed with Washington's efforts with regards to UFOs, but let's face it, there have been loads of leaks. Many of the stories, the whole work on Roswell came from people who were talking about the pieces of information that they have been aware of. Leaks are all over the place. Willingness to follow up on the leaks is quite another story. I think that the people who want to keep secrets have done a very good job of taking advantage of the egos of the Washington press corps who think that no secrets can be kept from them.
Stanton and his associates have, I think, done the nation a service by making public these documents. And now we can see what the news media of this country, how they evaluate them. As I say, if ABC, if the New York Times, the Washington Post thinks there's even 1% chance that they're authentic, they ought to launch an all-out effort.
Let me just pose the question a little bit differently, because as I said, we're not going to have a great deal of time tonight to talk about it. There is there not, Mr. Friedman, just a tremendous desire on our part. You talk about, the intellectual agnostic, but there is a tremendous desire on our part to believe in the existence of some extraterrestrial.
I don't think that's the case at all, Ted. I've lectured at over 500 colleges, I suppose. All the polls, the opinion polls, which the media depends so heavily on in other matters, have shown not only that most people believe in flying saucers, but that the greater the education, the more likely to believe in flying saucers.
Let me just add, because we're going to have to take a break. I was looking at some similar polls, and, you know, the same polls also show that 42% of the American public believe in communication with the dead. Maybe,
does that
who
vary
knows,
with
but
education in the same way?
I believe it does, but let's take a break and we'll continue our conversation in just a moment. Continuing our conversation now with Stanton Friedman and Phil Klass. Mr. Friedman, help me again. One thing, I mean, was it the hieroglyphics that you're most impressed with? That 5 people come back with similar hieroglyphics?
No, what's most impressive, Ted, is the similarity of evidence from around the world from so many people whose testimony you'd accept on anything else. That's what's so impressive. We're not dealing with one case or 10 cases.
What testimony are we talking about now?
We're talking about, for example, the description of a pilot with another pilot behind him in another plane, watching an object moving across in front of him with a guy on the ground watching them, watching the object move at what he estimates at 1,000 miles an hour in 3 seconds, reverse his speed, go a short distance in the sky, and do it again and again. That kind of case occurs all the time. There's an enormous volume of data that the skeptics refuse to consider. Mr. Klass, for example, in 3 books, doesn't even mention the largest study ever done about flying saucers because the data in it clearly contradict the pronouncements that he makes.
I'll tell you what, make it easy on me again, Mr. Klass. The object that was moving at an apparent speed of 1,000 miles an hour versus...
Ted, I cannot identify it off the top of my head. All I can say is that in your 7-minute intro here, there were any number of those cases that have been explained. Several of the photos were hoaxes.
Okay, but before we run out of time here, what we're dealing with, and again, that's why the public, I think, gloms onto this as much as it does. Here we have a couple of pilots. I mean, these are experienced observers, especially about things like that. Doesn't that cause you to wonder just a little bit?
No, it doesn't, because the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek did an analysis of pilot reports in the Air Force files and found that in terms of misidentifying prosaic objects like stars and balloons, that pilots, military and airline pilots, were no better than ordinary civilians. Being a pilot does not improve your powers of perception.
All right, let me just ask one last question, Mr. Friedman. In your convention here this week, what is it you're seeking to do most of all? I mean, just
We're seeking to exchange information, present new information. I'll be dealing with, for example, considerable evidence that one of the people on that Majestic 12 panel, who shouldn't have been there, he was a skeptic, turns out to have been connected on the inside with major intelligence agencies in ways that nobody knew before, which make his appearance on that panel quite sensible rather than the ridiculous notion it seemed at first blush. We'll be covering the latest word from around the world on sightings and on abductions in particular, and looking at the scientific evidence dealing with flying saucers, and there's a great deal of it.
All right, before we drop the subject altogether, and we're going over a couple of minutes, Mr. Klass, just tell me about abductions. I mean, of all the things that are being discussed here, those really seem the most bizarre, don't they?
Well, Ted, I'm writing a book on this subject. It's already 2/3 the way through. It'll be completed shortly, be published early next year.
Just give me the conclusions.
The conclusion is, to quote President FDR, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Anyone who doesn't want to be abducted, who doesn't go here, I'll predict that you'll get 50 volunteers. They love to talk about themselves. Whitley Strieber, the most famous one, became a millionaire by writing a book about his alleged abductions. They're all fantasies.
Mr. Friedman, a final comment from you, and then we're going to wrap it up.
I think it's time we look via pronouncements and psychic understanding that Phil seems to show to explain away the data that he doesn't want to deal with. There is an enormous amount of information. Those who wish to reach an opinion on it should look at the information relevant to the problem. Find it in Mr. Klass's book.
Okay, that was a short end of the debate between Philip Klass and Stanton Friedman back in 1987. It was interesting because you can see just by the questions that were asked and kind of the attitude of both Ted Koppel and Philip Klass, excuse me, that there was not much respect for the whole field of ufology and any evidence that was available, they basically just made fun of. So even at that time, when it was fairly well known, it was going on for 30, 40 years, observations in the public that the public, or at least the media, was not willing to open the door much to the whole concept. And today things, I would say, are a bit better. I think there's a lot more people out there who are open to the whole idea, and although the press is still reluctant to print anything that would indicate that they have an objective point of view around the subject. So there's people like Friedman out there that are still knocking on the door for the media to kind of wake up. Although I must say I just saw the other day on YouTube a rerun of a TV newscast that took place in Colorado. I think it was Breckenridge, Colorado, where 3 UFOs were seen by hundreds of people way up in the sky, and they had it on the news, and they didn't make fun of it. They didn't kind of, do the mocking thing and talk about little green men. They were actually talking sensibly about the possibility that these were definitely craft from outside of our space here. So it's opening up a bit, but very, very slowly. Okay, so the next bit here is this is Stanton Friedman Day, or the end of the audios of Stanton Friedman, is a speech he gave at the Citizens Disclosure hearing that took place in 2013. And that was a hearing where several witnesses gave their stories over a week's period of time. And this is Friedman giving his introduction to the topic. Okay, here we go.
About UFOs since 1958, and since 1967 has given well over 700 lectures in all 50 states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries. I've reached 4 major conclusions. 1, the evidence is overwhelming that Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underline 10 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. Don't care about them. 2, there is no doubt that a small number of people within governments, both in the United States and overseas, have been actively covering up the truth about these visits. There really is a cosmic Watergate. 3, there are no good arguments against these conclusions, only people who haven't studied the relevant evidence. And 4, flying saucer visitations and the cosmic Watergate represent the biggest story of the millennium. And I should say that I prefer the term flying saucer because all flying saucers are UFOs. Very few UFOs are flying saucers. All great-grandfathers are men. Not all men are great-grandfathers. I'm interested in the flying saucers, not the UFOs. The basis for these conclusions: A, there are at least 5 large-scale scientific studies which provide substantial evidence. These include Project Blue Book Special Report Number 14, the largest study ever done for the United States Air Force, covering more than 3,200 cases, with more than 200 charts, tables, graphs, and maps. It is quality evaluation, cross-comparison between unknowns and knowns. The official press release lied about the data. I'll document that in a minute. It is almost never referenced by UFO debunkers. Dr. Carl Sagan, we were classmates at the University of Chicago, claimed there are interesting UFO sightings that are not reliable, and reliable UFO sightings that are not interesting. But there are no cases that are both reliable and interesting. This statement was not backed up by reference to data, but is directly contradicted by the Blue Book Special Report 14 data. It was found that the more reliable the case, the more likely to be unexplainable. United States Air Force Secretary Donald Quarles, in a very widely distributed press release when the 1955 study was completed, flat out lied. It's a strong statement, and I'm sorry to make it, but it's true. He stated, quote, "We believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. The fact of the matter in the report that he was talking about is that the unknowns comprised 21.5% of the cases, completely separate from the 9.3% listed as insufficient information. The 3% number was a lie. Furthermore, a statistical comparison of the unknowns and knowns showed that the probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. It must further be noted that the press release did not give the title of the report or the company that did the work, Battelle Memorial Institute. If they'd given the title, surely some newsman would have said, hey, what happened to reports 1 through 13? They'd never heard about them. The correct answer, had it been given, would have been that they were all classified. It's a very valuable source of information, this report. It's funny how the debunkers never talk about it. Another primary source of valuable data, which should be of interest to you all, are the congressional hearings of July 29th, 1968, which included testimony from 12 scientists. The most important paper was by Dr. James E. McDonald, professor of physics at the University of Arizona. He had talked to 500 witnesses, but he presented 41 outstanding cases, including multiple witness radar visual sightings, sightings by pilots, by astronomers, by meteorologists. He noted physical trace cases, of which, by now, more than 5,000 have been collected by Ted Phillips from 95 countries. They get dull. Same thing was happening all over the world. Saucer is seen on the ground. It leaves. They find physical changes. It happens here. It happens there. It happens everywhere. 1/6 of those cases involved reports of small beings associated with the craft while it was on the ground. I was the youngest contributor to those, and I think the only survivor since then, to those hearings in 1968. And I was the only one without a PhD. That might tell you something. I'm not sure what. The proceedings, incidentally, are still available online. One of the contributors was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University, and for 20 years, United States Air Force scientific consultant to Project Blue Book. His book, The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, should be required reading by anybody who's going to talk about flying saucers, especially negatively. According to another source here, according to a special UFO subcommittee of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, world's largest group of space scientists, 30% of the 117 cases studied by the University of Colorado, government-sponsored study in the late 60s, and discussed in the Condon report, Edward U. Condon, could not be identified. And yet the headline said scientific study shows no UFOs. Totally untrue. There's a 2-volume report called the UFO Evidence, which has loads of data, hundreds of cases that couldn't be identified. There's also the Cometa report from France, which goes into numerous excellent officially involved cases in France. There are a dozen PhD theses about UFOs. One of them demonstrating how poor the press coverage has been. I haven't seen one about coverage by the scientific community or coverage by the political community. That's another story. Anybody need a PhD thesis topic? There's 2 good ones. Also, a third one, the will not to believe on the part of scientists. It's a sickness, a disease, if you will, infecting people who think they know all there is to know and don't. A really bad example of bias and ignorance appeared in Astronomy magazine this month, May 2013, by Dr. Phil Plait. He does a blog, The Bad Astronomy. The title of the article, believe it or not, is The Science Behind UFOs. It's a cover story. He somehow manages to mention none of the 5 large-scale scientific studies that I've just talked about, or any of the 5,000 physical trace cases, or any multiple witness radar visual cases, or abductions, nor advanced technology studies at national labs and in industry showing trips to nearby stars in reasonable round-trip times using fusion propulsion are feasible. I worked on fusion back in the early 60s. And to give you a form of reference, every star in the universe or multiverse produces its energy by nuclear fusion. That's what H-bombs are all about. And a good demonstration of the atom and the UFO together, if you will, is that in a very short period, we managed to go from a 10-ton blockbuster, World War II, 1945, took a big B-29 carry it. That was in 1944. In 1945, the first A-bomb, 15,000 tons of TNT, not 10. 7 years later, which is nothing, cost a lot of money, we set off the first fusion device, an H-bomb, called Mike, incidentally. It released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. So you go from 10 to 15,000 to 10 million tons. And the Russians sent off one that was 50 million tons of TNT. The point is, we know how to get to the stars if we want to spend the money. I'm not saying it's the ultimate technology. I'm saying scientific progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You have to change how you do things.
Okay, Stanton, I'm going to have to cut you off there. We're getting close to the end of the show. And I want to thank Stanton Friedman for all the work he's done. I don't know if he'll get my message, but he doesn't live too far away from here. And I'd like to say that next week we're going to have an interesting show about a false flag situation with ETs aggressively attacking the Earth. This is a very interesting way of perceiving what might be next as far as presenting a war situation to control the population. So it'll be interesting audio. I want to thank you for listening, and always remember that I wish that you to embrace the mystery, and especially to embrace the mystery that is you. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.